My name is Tori, this is Novel Life, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a really fun video that I saw my friend Jess at Peace Love Books do this video, and I thought, I'm gonna steal that idea because I think that's a really cool idea. So basically, I'm gonna be talking about my top 10 authors. It was actually really hard to narrow this down, and I think honestly it depends on the day. So when I'm filming this, these are the top 10, but I have like a bajillion other authors I could have chosen from. But these are 10 authors that I want to talk about, but I'm also going to talk about where I think you should start with their books. So a lot of people ask me sometimes like, oh, you know, when an author has such a big backlist, where do you start with them? So these are just some authors that I personally talk about all the time, and these are where I think you should start with their books. Now, the first one, I'm really gonna be surprised by this author if you watch my channel, and that is Gianna Darling. And where I think you should start with is the Anti-Heroes in Love duet. Technically, I read some of the Fallen Men series before I read this book. I think maybe this could have been my first Gianna Darling book, but this duet has When Heroes Fall and When Villains Rise in it. You have to read them together to get the happily ever after between Elena and Dante. And I personally think that this is such a good place to start with, because while it is kind of forbidden, it's not as taboo as some of her other books. And at the same time, the Fallen Men series is so long. There's 8 books. There's 7 books out, 6 books out. I don't know. There's a lot of books out, and my favorite is book 5, but you can't technically read book 5 by itself. You're supposed to read them in order. So it's hard to recommend like a full series to someone when they're just trying to start out with their books. So that's why I say this book. This is a mafia romance between the head of a mafia and his lawyer. Like I said, it's a little bit forbidden, very steamy, very sexy, beautiful love story. I feel like you can really dive into Gianna Darling's writing with this book, or with this duet, I should say, because you really see if that's for you. She does have some other books and other duets and other trilogies, but those are a little bit more taboo that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to everyone right off the bat. So Anti-Heroes in Love, I feel like it's a good place to start for Gianna. And if you're always wondering, this is what I recommend, is because it's Gianna Darling. It's also my favorite duet by her. The next author I have is Chloe Liese. I love Chloe Liese because she always puts such different things in her book that you don't always see in every single romance book. Do you know what I mean? She puts disabilities and chronic illness representation, mental illness representation in her books. But I personally think that you should start with Always Only You. Now, this is the second book in the series, in the Bergman Brothers series, and she has the Bergman Brothers series, and then she has a traditionally published series. I have not read that yet, and I've heard mixed things about that book, but the Bergman Brothers series I feel like is a solid place to start. And the reason why I choose Always Only You is because compared to Only When It's Us, which is the first book, I think a lot of people love Always Only You more. Yes, you can read them out of order. You do not have to read them in order. I mean, it's always nice to, because you get to see all the characters, but they follow different couples. And I personally am biased because in this book, we have our main character, Frankie. She has rheumatoid arthritis, which is something I also have, and she's autistic, and you get to see kind of her struggle with, you know, a physical disability and chronic illness that affects her physically, but also with her autism, and you can see kind of what she deals with on a day-to-day basis, as well as Ren, who is our main male character, who is this super swoon-worthy cinnamon roll hero that just takes care of Frankie, and they just have this beautiful love story, and I love it so much. I always recommend this book if you're starting with Chloe Liese, just because I love it and it's one of my favorites. So, I mean, I love the whole Bergman Brothers series, so you can pretty much read any of them, but I'm biased towards this one as well. The next author I want to talk about is Kennedy Ryan, and the book, okay, I feel like I went back and forth with these books, but instead of recommending a series, I wanted to recommend a standalone romance. So I'm going to recommend Real by Kennedy Ryan. Now, this is one of her indie published books. She does have a couple traditionally published books now. I personally would recommend Real because it is a complete standalone and it is one book. She has a couple of duets. She has a trilogy. She has another standalone, but I would prefer to recommend this book. I think that this book is also really good to see of her writings for you, because she does write really emotional stuff. And to be honest, I think that to some people, this is probably her least emotional, even though for me personally, it was one of the most emotional romances I've read by her, just because I related to the female character and what she's going through with her lupus diagnosis. So that's why it was a little bit more emotional to me. But if you are not someone who deals with a chronic illness or a disability or anything like that, some of her other books are going to be more emotional for you. So I would recommend Real, because you also get this standalone romance in this book, and you don't have to read a duet. You don't have to read a duet, or you don't have to read a trilogy to kind of get that happily ever after. I was going to recommend the Grip trilogy, but that's a trilogy. So I was like, I don't know if people are going to commit to a trilogy just to see if Kennedy writes for them, but I'm going to recommend Real. I think that Neva and Cannon have a beautiful love story. There's so many tropes in this book. There is workplace romance. Cannon sees Neva performing on stage and was like, I need her to play in my biopic, because he's a director. And he's like, I need her to play in my biopic. She's the one who's going to bring this to life. And they kind of have this like secretive romance on set, but then Neva has her lupus diagnosis that kind of is the worst case scenario, and Cannon is there for her in such a beautiful way, and I loved it. I mean, I could talk about this book forever, but would highly recommend Real. The next author is Nikki Castle. So Nikki Castle doesn't have that big of a backlist. She recently just started publishing, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. But the one that I'm going to recommend is one that you're not going to expect, and that's The Stranger in Seat 8B. And the only reason why I'm recommending this is, one, because it's a novella, and two, you really get to see Nikki's writing in such a compressed story. I would love if she turned this book into a full-length romance, because I think it is a really wonderful story. But if you wanted to see if Nikki Castle is for you without committing to a really long book, I would suggest this one. She does have 5 rounds and 2 fights, which is the first 2 books in the Fight Game series. That, of course, I'd recommend those 2 books, but they're a commitment. They're very long. They're about 400 pages or more. I personally love those 2 books, but The Stranger in Seat 8B is a novella that you get to really see if her writing's for you. She writes steamy goodness. I would say you can read 3 Count out of order. That's the 3rd book in the Fight Game series, but I feel like that's more you do get to see it, but that's more spicy too. So between 3 Count and The Stranger in Seat 8B, I think you could really get to see her writing and if it's for you. But those are the 2 books that I recommend to start with for Nikki Castle. But she is releasing a book, I think, this year, which is the 4th game in the Fight Game series, which I am super excited for. I cannot wait for that book. The next author that I have to talk about is Jennifer Hartman. So I have read Jennifer Hartman's whole backlist minus her new duet that she recently came out with, just because I have to hype myself up, because her stuff is extremely emotional and it makes me cry. Okay, now I'm gonna recommend The Wrong Heart. This is not the original cover, this is a special edition cover, but the reason why I'm gonna recommend this book is because Still Beating has a lot of triggering things. In Still Beating, that's her most popular book, but I feel like The Wrong Heart is actually one that's very underrated. There's triggers in every single one of her books, okay? Honestly, she has a ton of triggers in every book. So if you don't like reading books that may trigger you or that are super dark, then Jennifer Hartman's not going to be the author for you. I'll just say that. But in this book, there is attempted suicide ideation, a lot of talks of suicide in this book. But I personally loved this romance. I think Jennifer Hartman drags you through it. In the story, you're going to get a happily ever after, but it's the journey of getting to the happily ever after that really does you in. And I think that these 2 characters have gone through so much. And when I read it, I was like, wow, this is such an underrated book. It's up there with Still Beating for me. And I really love this. So if you're new to Jennifer Hartman, I would suggest checking out The Wrong Heart, just because I feel like it's super underrated. And I think a lot of people would love it if they read it. The next author I have to talk about is Liese Kleypas. I haven't read that many historicals lately, but I'll tell you that Liese Kleypas is one of my all-time favorite historical romance authors. And I was going to put some more, but I was like, you know what? Liese Kleypas is a classic. She has stuff dating back to the 90s all the way to newly published stuff. And the one that I'm going to recommend is Again the Magic by Liese Kleypas, because I feel like this opens up to the Wallflower series. You don't technically have to read this before you read the Wallflower series, but it's technically the first book. It's very weird. Anyway, I love this story. You kind of get 2 romances in one. So you really get to see Liese Kleypas's writing and how good of a writer she is, that she can write a book that's, this is mass market and it's 400 pages, but that you can see in a full-length book that you get not only the main couple and their romance and what they're going through, but you also get this, these side characters that you also start to fall in love with, and you also start to get invested in their romance, and you really feel fulfilled. You honestly feel fulfilled at the end of the book, where you get the happily ever after for both of them. So I personally really loved it. It's a, different social classes. Our female character is the daughter of a well-known, I think it's a duke. I'm not mistaken. She's a lady. And then you have McKenna, who is, at the time, he works as a servant in their house. And, you know, her father finds them kind of making out, kissing, or they have feelings for each other. And he basically sends McKenna away. McKenna goes to the US, becomes a self-made man. Then he comes back and is like, I'm going to win this girl back. Or I'm going to show her. It's not I'm going to win this girl back. It's I'm going to show her what she's missing. Because he's under the impression that she sent him away. And I really love this book. It makes me want to reread it because I love Liese Kleypas' writing. The audiobooks are also really good for Liese Kleypas. I just would highly recommend this book. The next author I'm going to talk about is Cowles. She's recently became a new favorite of mine. A lot of people ask me, should I start with the Tattered and Torn series or should I start with the Lost and Found series? I'm going to personally recommend the Tattered and Torn series, and I think you should start with Tattered Stars. And the reason why I say that is even though this is a completed series, so you get all of the characters and their happily ever afters, all the books are already out. The Lost and Found series is more romantic suspense, when the Tattered and Torn series is more small town. That's personally how I would categorize it. I just feel like while you do get suspenseful aspects in all of the Tattered and Torn series books, the suspense and the romantic suspense is heavier in the new series that she has going on, which is the Lost and Found series. So, I mean, it's really just like pick your kind of poison, whatever you prefer, but I personally prefer books with less romantic suspense in them. Plus, in this series, Shattered Sea is one of my favorite books by Cowles. It's the 5th book. I think you could probably read it as a standalone, but I think you should read them in order because there's this overarching plot that by the time you get to the 5th book, it really kind of like works out. So you kind of have to read them in order, and I did, and I prefer that way. So that's why I think you should start with Tattered and Torn series, which is Tattered Stars is the first book. So all these covers are really good. I mean, Cowles really does have really a beautiful and amazing covers for all of her books, but yeah, I would say start with Tattered Stars. The next author I want to talk about is Lauren Asher. So Lauren Asher actually doesn't have that big of a backlist. I am one of those people that I'm going to always recommend her Dirty Air series first to people, and I think you should read Wrecked by Lauren Asher. I feel like, I don't know what it is about Lauren Asher, but Wrecked and Redeemed, which is the 3rd and 4th book in her Formula One series, which is the Dirty Air series, are top tier writing for me. You get this emotional freaking romance. You get these characters that you fall in love with. You get these heroes that you cannot stop thinking about. And I love this because we have anxiety representation in this book. Our main male character is actually the Formula One driver, and he's dealing with this anxiety, and he's trying to cope with it in different ways of coping. And our female character kind of steps in as his PR person to kind of like get his shit back together because he's ruining his reputation, which is also bringing down the reputation of the team. It's a big thing, and they kind of are forced together to work together, but also they're forced together in proximity, and they're forced to work together and be around each other, and they have this really amazing emotional romance that comes out of it. So I would highly suggest these two over the whole Dreamland Billionaire series. I know that's the one that's super popular because it's billionaires, but this Formula One series is so underrated, especially the books 3 and 4, which is Wrecked and Redeemed. So I would suggest pick your poison, pick whichever one between Wrecked or Redeemed. My favorite goes back and forth depending on the day, and I'm feeling like the representation in Wrecked is better than Redeemed, but if you could ask me tomorrow, I would say probably Redeemed is better than Wrecked. I go back and forth. They're both 5-star reads for me. Absolutely love them. The next author I want to talk about is Penelope Douglas. And I am going to go balls to the wall, which I think some people should, and that just start with Credence. Just do it. Just do it, okay? Because the way I see it is that out of Penn Douglas's all of their books, this is probably the most taboo and the most kind of talked about in the way of I love it or I hate it. A lot of people are either one way or the other. I just so happen to be I love it. Now, if you read this book and you love it, great. Move on to the Devil's Night series. That's where I would start, right? But this is a complete standalone. It's not part of a series. You can read it by itself. I love this. This is one of my favorite Penn Douglas books. But if you hate it, then you can go pick another like Birthday Girl, because that's also one I would recommend. But I would say start with this one and just go balls to the wall. Why not? The most taboo, the most forbidden, the most steamy, I would think. Maybe not the most steamy, but it's up there with the most steamy. But I love Penn Douglas, so I would say balls to the wall. Start with this one. I'm always going to recommend this one because I love it. The last author I have to recommend is Bethany Chris. Bethany Chris is one that I've been a fan of for 5-6 years now, and she has a ginormous backlist. Listen, I know you guys have been asking me for an author deep dive and an author guide to Bethany Chris, but she has over 70 published books, guys, and I've read 60 of them, 63 of them. I've read a lot of her books, and the one where I think you should start is with Luchan, which is the first book in the Marcello series. So in the Bethany Chris world, she has the Chicago, she has New York, she has Canada, she has Vegas. She has all of these different families and all these different crime organizations, but they all are set in the same world. And I would say start with this, because it opens up the New York, which is very, they're shorter books. And then I would say move to the Chicago books. Then I would say move to Canada. And then you can start with the Next Generation. The Next Generation kind of has some more standalones. They're not all in a series. So that's why I would recommend going from there. But start with Luchan. It's one of my favorites. Everyone that's read it also is like, yeah, this is a really good mafia romance. This is very simplistic in the mafia, very traditional in the mafia world. Very the rich, the throwing the money around, the rival MC family that's also in this book. Absolutely love it. Love the family aspect. Love all of it. So yeah, I will always say for Bethany Chris, start with Luchan if you're not sure. Those are my top 10 favorite authors and where I think you should start with them. You can let me know in the comments down below if you have any authors that you're like, hey, I know you talk about this one a lot. Where would you start? I will respond to the comment with a book, but I just picked 10 of my favorites. But make sure you check out Jess's video. I'll have hers linked in the description box below because I've got this idea from her. But for the emoji, drop me the new pink heart emoji. There's like a new bright vibrant pink because my eyeshadow is very vibrant pink today. I'm feeling the pink. But I want to say thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for more content for me. As always, I hope you're living a novel life, and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys.